Machiavelli never spoke about love the way modern men want it to be spoken about. He did not romanticize it, soften it, or separate it from power. To him, love was not sacred territory protected from reality. It was part of reality, and therefore subject to the same laws that govern loyalty, ambition, fear, and control. Men ignored him because he refused to lie to them. He refused to tell them that affection makes them safe or that devotion protects them from consequence. His warning begins with a simple observation that feels uncomfortable precisely because it is accurate. Men become weakest at the exact moment they believe they are being chosen. The moment a man feels emotionally secured by a woman's desire, he begins to relax his vigilance. He stops governing himself with the same precision. He assumes the rules have changed. Machiavelli would say the rules never change, only the player's awareness does. Machiavelli understood human nature not as it should be, but as it behaves under pressure. He observed that people do not attach themselves to virtue. They attach themselves to advantage, stability, and strength. Love may enter the picture, but it never replaces these forces. When a man believes love exempts him from strategy, he does not transcend power dynamics. He becomes blind to them. Most men do not lose power dramatically. They lose it quietly through emotional concessions that feel reasonable in isolation. A boundary softened to preserve harmony, a conviction withheld to avoid tension, a goal postponed because it disrupts comfort. None of these feel like surrender while they are happening. They feel like maturity, compromise, even wisdom. Machiavelli would call this the most dangerous form of disarmament, the kind that convinces the man he is still in control while he is slowly giving it away. To Machiavelli, the central question was never whether a man was loved, it was whether he was respected. Love, he warned, is volatile. It depends on mood, circumstance, and perceived benefit. Respect is more stable because it is rooted in structure. A man who is respected does not need to demand loyalty. It forms naturally around him because his presence carries weight. Men often reverse this order. They chase love first and hope respect will follow. Machiavelli would tell you this is backwards. When a man organizes his identity around being desired, he places his sense of worth in unstable hands. The moment desire fluctuates, as it always does, his internal stability collapses with it. He becomes reactive, anxious, and increasingly willing to trade authority for reassurance. This is where men misunderstand women and then blame them for the consequences of their own miscalculations. A woman does not need to consciously manipulate a man who has already tied his emotional equilibrium to her approval. She only needs to be human, to hesitate, to change, to pull back slightly. The man, sensing the shift, begins adjusting himself preemptively. He explains more, he gives more, he negotiates his values more carefully. Machiavelli would observe that power has already moved. Power, in his view, is revealed by who adapts. The one who adapts more is the one with less leverage. This is not cruelty, it is structure. When a man fears loss more than dishonor, he becomes governable. He begins managing himself in ways that prioritize emotional safety over self-command. Machiavelli warned relentlessly against this condition because it makes a man predictable, and predictability without authority is weakness. Men often believe they are being emotionally intelligent when they expose everything they feel without restraint. Machiavelli would sharply disagree. He believed that transparency without discipline is not strength, it is vulnerability without defense. When a man reveals uncertainty before he has mastered it, he does not deepen intimacy, he alters the balance of power. Not because the woman intends to exploit it, but because human perception responds instinctively to instability. This is the part men resist. Machiavelli did not believe that good intentions protect you from outcomes. He believed that outcomes follow structure, not morality. A man who abandons his center for connection teaches others unconsciously how to treat him. He becomes easier to influence, easier to test, easier to disregard, not because he lacks value, but because he has made his value conditional. Machiavelli warned that the greatest mistake a man can make is allowing anything external to become the source of his inner order. When love replaces direction, dependency replaces authority. When attachment replaces purpose, fear replaces clarity. And fear, more than any enemy, makes a man manageable. This is only the surface of the warning, because once a man begins trading self-command for emotional reassurance, the cost does not appear immediately. It emerges slowly as loss of attraction, subtle disrespect, inner resentment, and confusion about how things changed without a clear turning point. Machiavelli would say nothing mysterious occurred. The structure collapsed exactly as it always does when a man forgets to rule himself. Machiavelli believed that the most dangerous losses are the ones that occur without resistance. No battle, no confrontation, no moment dramatic enough to trigger alarm. Dependence forms quietly when a man begins treating emotional connection as necessity rather than choice. At that moment, his decisions stop flowing from strength and start flowing from fear, even if he refuses to call it that. Fear rarely announces itself honestly. It disguises itself as concern, as caution, as emotional responsibility. A man tells himself he is protecting the relationship, when in reality he is protecting himself from the anxiety of separation. Machiavelli would say this is how men become governable, not through force, but through the fear of losing what they believe they cannot replace. He observed that men who lack internal order search for stability outside themselves. Once they find it, they cling to it, and whatever they cling to gains leverage. This is not a moral judgment, it is a structural law. Whoever becomes necessary gains power. Whoever fears loss becomes predictable, and predictability is always exploitable, even unintentionally. Most men do not notice when this shift occurs because it feels like attachment, not surrender. They feel more invested, more committed, more serious. Yet beneath the surface, their independence is eroding. They begin adjusting their behavior to maintain emotional equilibrium rather than pursuing their own trajectory. Their world subtly narrows, priorities realign, risks feel heavier, ambitions feel negotiable. Machiavelli would say that a man who makes himself dependent has already begun to weaken his position. This is where men misunderstand love most severely. They believe that being needed makes them valuable. Machiavelli would argue the opposite. Being needed creates obligation, not respect. Respect arises when a man's presence is chosen, not required. The moment a man's value is tied to emotional supply, he becomes replaceable by any source that offers the same comfort with less friction. Women sense this shift instinctively, not because they are calculating, but because human perception responds to strength and weakness long before language does. When a man becomes emotionally contingent, his presence loses its edge. He feels safer, but safety without authority breeds familiarity, and familiarity without respect erodes attraction. Machiavelli warned that affection cannot survive where authority collapses. Men often respond to this erosion in the worst possible way. They increase effort, more reassurance, more availability, more explanation. They believe proximity will restore what distance threatens. Machiavelli would recognize this as the final mistake. When leverage has shifted, increasing submission does not regain balance, it confirms imbalance. At this stage, the man feels confused. He is giving more, yet receiving less. He becomes resentful, but cannot articulate why. He believes he is being taken for granted, yet he continues to offer more of himself. Machiavelli would say the issue is not ingratitude, it is misplacement of power. A man who offers everything leaves nothing that must be earned. This is why Machiavelli warned against emotional overexposure. He did not advocate cruelty or coldness. He advocated containment. A man must possess himself before he can offer himself. When he spills his fears, uncertainties, and insecurities without having integrated them, he does not create closeness. He signals instability. Stability, not sincerity, is what anchors respect. Men ignore this because modern culture rewards emotional display while neglecting emotional discipline. Machiavelli would find this dangerous. He believed that discipline precedes trust. A man who cannot govern his emotions cannot expect others to trust his leadership, even in private life. Love, in his view, is not the absence of power. It is the expression of power under restraint.